Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting straight to the heart of neuromorphic computing.
Right.
It's a really fascinating field, moving super fast. The core idea, trying to build computer hardware that actually mimics, the human brain, how it's built, how it works.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift.
And it could potentially shake up a lot of industries. We're talking manufacturing,
Yeah,
AI.
absolutely. And it's really the explosion in AI that's put a lot of focus on this. We're hitting limits with traditional computing for certain AI tasks.
That makes sense. The power demands alone are huge.
Precisely. So people are looking at the brain, this incredibly efficient computer, for inspiration.
Before we really dive in, just want to mention this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, DR, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
And they offer things like secure, ransomware-proof storage.
Yeah, air-gapped, immutable options. If that's something you need, check them out. Contact sales at stonefly.com for a demo.
Okay, so neuromorphic,
Hmm.
mimicking the brain. What does that really mean architecturally?
Right, architecturally. How is it different from my laptop chip?
Well, fundamentally, it's about breaking down that wall between where you process data and where you store it. The CPU and RAM separation.
Okay.
In the brain, neurons and synapses processing and memory are tangled together, incredibly interconnected. Neuromorphic chips try to replicate that integration,
So processing and memory are closer together.
much closer. And they operate differently, too. Lots of parallel processing, like millions of tiny processors working at once. And it's often event-driven,
Event-driven.
meaning they only really wake up and compute when there's new information, a new event. Like neurons firing only when they receive enough input.
Okay. Not constantly number crunching, just reacting. That sounds efficient.
Potentially very efficient, yes. Which leads to applications. Think about large-scale operations like smart factories.
Right. Factories have sensors everywhere now.
Exactly. A huge amount of data coming in constantly. Neuromorphic chips, with their parallel processing, are theoretically great at handling that massive simultaneous sensor input
So they could monitor everything in real time. Machineware, quality control.
and adapt. That's the key. Not just follow preset rules, but actually adjust the manufacturing process on the fly based on that real-time data. Respond to variations, maybe even predict faults before they happen.
That goes way beyond basic automation. That's like intelligent manufacturing.
It's heading in that direction, yeah. True flexibility.
And I guess that pattern recognition skill, it wouldn't just be for finding problems, right? Could it help design better products too?
That's another potential angle, understanding subtle patterns in consumer data, maybe helping design products that are much more customized, more targeted to specific needs or tastes.
Hyper-personalization almost.
That's the vision, yeah. Moving beyond mass production to something more tailored.
Okay, so manufacturing product design. Let's swing back to AI. You said AI progress is driving this. What are the limitations of our current computers for really advanced AI, trying to get closer to human-like intelligence?
Well, traditional computers, the von Neumann architecture, are amazing, obviously. But they process things sequentially, step by step, and they separate memory and processing.
Right.
Biological brains don't really work like that. They're massively parallel, interconnected, and they handle fuzzy, real-world sensory data incredibly well, in real time. Think about how easily we perceive and react.
Yeah, it's seamless. Computers often struggle with that kind of fluid, real-time interaction, especially efficiently.
Exactly. They can do amazing things with deep learning, but it often takes enormous computational power and energy. Mimicking that lifelike interaction and perception efficiently is a huge challenge for them.
And this is where the neuromorphic approach comes in with this event-based processing using spikes.
Spikes, yes, that's the key concept often. Biological neurons communicate with these brief electrical pulses, or spikes. Neuromorphic hardware often tries to mimic this.
So information is carried in the timing of these spikes.
Often, yes, it's event-based. Computation happens when a spike arrives. This is thought to be much closer to how the brain processes information, especially sensory information that changes over time. And it's inherently more energy efficient because you're not processing data constantly.
We hear about different generations of neural networks. First, the perceptron, then deep learning. Where do these spiking neural networks, SNNs, fit in?
SNNs are generally considered the third generation. They explicitly try to incorporate the timing of these spikes into their computation, making them more biologically plausible and hopefully more powerful for certain tasks. They aim to bridge the gap between neuroscience and machine learning.
Okay, so it's a fundamentally different computational model. Let's contrast it more sharply with traditional computing. You said sequential versus parallel.
Right. Traditional CPUs process instructions one after another. Neuromorphic chips are inherently parallel, many units working simultaneously.
And continuous values versus spikes.
Yes. Traditional computers excel at high-precision math, using continuous numbers. Neuromorphic systems often work with these discrete events, these spikes, similar to neuron firings.
And the big one, energy consumption. Why are neuromorphic chips potentially so much more power efficient?
It comes back to that event-driven nature. If there's no input, no event, the neurons are largely idle. They only consume significant power when they actually process a spike or fire one themselves. Traditional systems often draw power continuously while clocked. For complex AI, the difference could be massive.
Okay, let's get deeper into these spiking neural networks, SNNs. How do they actually work with these spikes?
So in SNNs, information is encoded in these discrete signals, the spikes occurring at specific points in time. Think of them as little blips of activity.
Unlike traditional ANNs, artificial neural networks, which often use continuous values, like an average firing rate.
Exactly. Many ANNs work with activation values that represent something like a firing rate, ignoring the precise timing. SNNs make timing crucial.
How does that relate to actual biology? Neurons have this electrical potential, right?
They do. A biological neuron has a membrane potential, a voltage difference across its cell wall. It fluctuates based on inputs it receives from other neurons via synapses.
There's some baseline voltage, the resting potential.
Yes, a resting membrane potential. It's maintained by ion pumps. When inputs arrive, they can cause this potential to increase or decrease.
And if it increases enough?
If it crosses a certain threshold voltage, bang. The neuron fires an action potential, the spike. It's a rapid stereotyped surge in voltage caused by ions like sodium and potassium flowing across the membrane through specific channels.
And then it resets.
Yes, it resets,
Yeah.
and there's usually a brief refractory period where it's harder or impossible to fire again immediately.
That sounds really complex to model perfectly.
It is. The Hodgkin-Huxley model describes it very accurately using differential equations for ion channel dynamics, but it's computationally very expensive.
So SNNs use simpler models.
Often, yes. There's a whole range, trading off biological realism for computational efficiency. A very common one is the leaky integrate and fire, or LAF model.
Leaky integrate and fire, what does that mean?
Integrate means it sums up incoming signals, increasing its internal membrane potential. Leaky means this potential gradually decays back towards the resting state if no new input arrives. Fire means if the potential hits a threshold, it fires a spike and the potential is reset.
Okay, so it captures the basic idea. Accumulate input, fire if threshold reached, then reset. Much simpler.
Much simpler, computationally, but still powerful enough to capture key dynamics. There are others too, like the Isikovich model or ADX, which add a bit more complexity and realism without being as heavy as Hodgkin-Huxley.
So that's the individual neuron model. How do they connect and communicate? Through synapses.
Exactly. SNNs need synaptic models too. When a presynaptic neuron spikes, it causes a change in the postsynaptic neuron, usually modeled as a postsynaptic current, or PSC. These models describe how that current rises and decays over time.
And learning happens by changing the strength of these synaptic connections.
That's the core idea, yes. Learning in SNNs is a big research topic because the standard method for ANNs, backpropagation, doesn't directly apply easily.
Why not?
Backpropagation relies on calculating gradients through the network, which requires smooth, differentiable functions. Spikes are discrete events. They happen or they don't, which makes them non-differentiable in a straightforward way.
Ah, so you can't just tweak weights using standard backprop. What do SNNs use instead?
There are workarounds to adapt backprop, like using a surrogate gradient. But a more biologically inspired approach, very prominent in SNNs, is spike timing-dependent plasticity, or STDP.
STDP, spike timing. So the timing matters for learning, too.
Critically, STDP modifies the strength of a synapse based on the relative timing of spikes from the neuron sending the signal, presynaptic, and the neuron receiving it, postsynaptic.
How does that work?
The basic idea, often linked to Hebbian learning neurons that fire together, wire together, is that if the presynaptic neuron fires just before the postsynaptic neuron, the connection gets stronger. That's long-term potentiation, LTP.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. Pre-causes post, so strengthen the link.
Right. And conversely, if the presynaptic neuron fires just after the postsynaptic neuron, the connection often gets weaker. That's long-term depression, LTD. It suggests the presynaptic spike wasn't contributing to the postsynaptic firing.
So the precise timing encodes causality, in a way, and the synapse learns that. That's elegant.
It is. And there are variations. Anti-Hebbian STDP does the opposite. Mirrored STDP combines aspects. Probabilistic STDP adds randomness.
Any others linking learning to, like rewards?
Yes, reward-modulated STDP, or RSPDP, is important. It uses an external reward signal like dopamine in the brain to guide the plasticity. Basically, STDP proposes a change, and the reward signal decides if that change actually happens or how strong it is. It's a way to do reinforcement learning with spikes.
Wow, okay. Lots of different ways these networks might learn. Are there other mechanisms besides STDP?
Sure. Things like PES, prescribed error sensitivity, which is more of a supervised learning rule for online adjustments, and intrinsic plasticity, IP, where individual neurons adjust their own firing properties to stay in a useful operating range.
It feels like a really rich toolkit for building learning systems. So where are people actually using these SNNs now? What are the applications?
Computer vision is a big one. Image classification, object detection, segmentation. People are trying to build SNNs that can perform similarly to standard deep neural networks on tasks like recognizing handwritten digits, MAS, or medical images, but using much less energy.
Any specific examples?
There are things like spiking YOLO for object detection, trying to match YOLO's performance with better efficiency, or UNet-based SNNs for image segmentation, sometimes running directly on neuromorphic hardware.
Running on the special hardware must be where the real energy savings kick in. What about robotics?
Robotics is another key area. SNNs are well suited for controlling rhythmic movements, like walking gaits and legged robots, using models called spiking central pattern generators, or CPGs.
Like the neural circuits that control walking in animals.
Kind of mimicking that idea, yeah. Also motor control for things like drones, maybe offering faster reaction times, and navigation using SNNs for SLAM, simultaneous localization, and mapping.
So the robot can build a map and figure out where it is efficiently.
Exactly. There are SNN versions of algorithms like RAT-SLAM being developed, aiming for low-power navigation on mobile robots. Again, energy efficiency is often a major goal.
You mentioned IBM's chips before, North Pole.
Yes, North Pole is a more recent example.
Mhm.
IBM reported significant efficiency and speed gains with it for AI inference compared to existing chips, even their earlier True North neuromorphic chip. Having dedicated hardware like this is crucial for pushing SNN applications forward.
It sounds incredibly promising, but you also mentioned challenges. Training these networks is still tricky.
It is. Applying SNNs effectively to really large, complex data sets, like the ones used in state-of-the-art deep learning, is still tough. The non-differentiability, the complex temporal dynamics, it makes training harder than standard ANNs. There's a lot of research going into better training algorithms and network architectures.
But the interest is definitely growing across different fields.
Absolutely. You see researchers in neuromorphic engineering, neuroscience, computer science, even biomedicine, all getting more involved. There's a lot of cross-pollination.
Biomedicine, how so?
The low-power footprint is really attractive for implantable devices. Think about brain-computer interfaces, or devices for detecting and maybe even stopping epileptic seizures, or for responsive neurostimulation for conditions like Parkinson's. Running those algorithms efficiently on device is critical.
So you're seeing major funding bodies get interested too.
Yes, for instance, the U.S. National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health recently co-sponsored a workshop specifically on neuromorphic principles in biomedicine and healthcare. That shows the growing recognition of the potential in that area.
It really covers a huge range then, from factories to AI to inside the human body.
It does. The core ideas, brain-inspired parallel processing, event-driven computation, spike-based learning, energy efficiency, have really broad appeal.
So summing up, we have this fundamentally different way of computing, inspired by the brain, using SNNs and specialized hardware. Key advantages are potential energy savings, real-time processing.
And adaptability.
Mhm.
Great for complex sensor data, robotics, potentially more efficient AI, and maybe even new biomedical devices. It's a very active field.
Still challenges, especially with training large-scale networks, but the momentum seems strong.
Definitely. The progress in understanding the brain, combined with advances in hardware and algorithms, is really pushing neuromorphic computing forward.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What kinds of problems that seem intractable now might become solvable if these brain-inspired approaches become more widespread? Maybe something for you, the listener, to think about in your own field.
It's an exciting prospect.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for shedding light on such a complex topic.
My pleasure.
And just a reminder, this deep dive was brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery. AI storage, and cloud solutions. If you need secure, ransomware-proof storage, think about their air-gapped and immutable solutions. You can contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo.